if you think about an individual's perspective, that's how they feel. That's their reality. And so we've got to make sure that we understand how they're feeling instead of just looking at the cold hard numbers because they don't tell the full story. You're still hearing things as a leader on the floor when you talk to your employees, you have informal conversations. You want to make sure that you are taking note of that and taking stock of what you could potentially change and what you could potentially impact to make the employees' overall experience even better.
Hi, and welcome to BetterWorks People Fundamentals podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Litzenberger, Senior Director of Product Marketing. BetterWorks' core belief in people fundamentals revolves around helping HR lead through constant change by focusing on core values like fairness, support, balance, and enabling growth for employees. These tenets empower everyone in the workforce to strive for excellence, to foster creativity, and to acknowledge each other's contributions. BetterWorks believes that strategic HR leaders can translate these principles into action, shaping their workforce for the better and helping drive meaningful business outcomes. And in this show, we're diving even deeper into these principles by listening to experts share how you can make them come alive at your organization. In this episode, I'm joined by Nick Happ, Director of Talent Management and Employee Listening at KeHE Distributors. Nick has led the charge in integrating continuous listening, performance enablement, and data-driven insights into KeHE's talent strategy. In our conversation, Nick shares how his team has shifted from traditional performance management to a model that helps employees unlock their potential through regular, structured conversations. We'll explore how KeHE uses centralized people analytics dashboards to connect engagement, performance, and retention. And we'll talk about the role AI is starting to play in making these insights easier for leaders to act on. If you've been looking for practical ways to connect your performance, engagement, and analytics strategies, this episode is full of ideas you can bring back to your own organization. Let's dig in. Hi, Nick. It's so nice to have you on our podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Ashley.
Great. Before we dive in, I just want to note you are the Director of Talent Management and Continuous Listening at KeHE. And I'm curious, where did the part of the continuous listening in your title come from? I've never seen it before.
Yeah, I inherited early on, and some former colleagues of mine had actually started venturing down the path of how we could do employee engagement even better. And it was set off by COVID, as many things were, where they had just finished an entire annual engagement survey. And by the time that they were going to start acting upon the results, all of a sudden COVID hit and the company went into survival mode and nothing was done with the results. So the thought was we need to do something that is a little bit more frequent. In fact, they were pushing for weekly. And so hence this, as you can see on my shirt, the KeHE Vibe was born. And it would basically ask each team member how their last week was at the end of the week and give them on a scale of pure goodness, not so good, a rating. And then they would have an opportunity to provide a little bit more detail around it. It's since evolved, but I've inherited this program, which I thought was very innovative, and it's been really exciting. And the reason we've titled it Continuous Listening more broadly is because we want to encourage our leadership team to listen to their team members. And the Vibe is just a supplemental portion of that, right? It's great because we can get some analytics, which we'll of course talk about, and like confidential insights that people might not be willing to share in person. But you're still hearing things as a leader on the floor when you talk to your employees, you have informal conversations. You want to make sure that you are taking note of that and taking stock of what you could potentially change and what you could potentially impact to make the employees' overall experience even better.
Mm-hmm. That is really cool. As a marketer, I firmly believe that words matter. And so I get really curious when I start to see new terms emerge or new titles getting created. And I think continuous listening really reflects the role that HR has, which is to have a pulse on what's going on with your employees, especially at large companies. And so finding that way to be that feedback loop, that's one of the places where you can add the most value and have the most influence in the way that your employees experience their day-to-day work.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's dive into a couple of questions around data and analytics, which is the theme of this season. So I know that you recently took ownership of the people analytics function. Tell me what that handoff looked like and what were your first steps in getting started?
Well, I'll admit that people analytics was something I was very interested in and taking kind of under my umbrella. Being over talent management, I feel like we've got a lot of core people data. You think about performance management, which we call performance enablement now, since we've both rebranded and kind of evolved our approach. You've got, the performance ratings, you've got trajectory ratings or potential ratings, as most people refer to it, and 9-box placements, and then succession planning data, and then we've also got the continuous listening data. So it just made sense to let's keep the people analytics housed underneath talent management because it all fits together, and we're keeping it close to the data sources. It was originally kind of its own group, nested under compensation of all places. But after the original owner had left KE, we ended up absorbing that back in. So I think it's where it belongs, and we're kind of reconsidering how do we adjust the strategy to make sure that we are giving the organization the insights that are going to drive our business forward and really help our leaders make better people decisions.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Like if you are owning performance management data where you've got one-on-ones, check-ins, reviews, and then you're also doing the continuous listening part where you're getting those, annual and more frequent surveys from your employees, you are the source of all the data that the analytics team is then digging into. So bringing those teams closer together to make sure you're getting consistent data points time over time so you can measure progress, so that you can actually work together when you're building out whatever frameworks or whatever surveys or whatever templates you're creating, creates a much tighter connection between those two and ultimately can make the data so much more valuable.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting. I'm curious, you mentioned that you've been shifting your mindset from talking about performance management to performance enablement. I know a lot of other HR leaders out there are having the same conversation. Can you tell me a little bit about what the shift in terms from performance management to performance enablement really signals to you and to your organization?
Well, this is a bit of a longer story because it's part of my own personal evolution as I've been leading performance management for quite a while in my career. And I, of course, was introduced to it as a very traditional approach where you goal set in the year, you have a mid-year, perhaps with an on-track, off-track rating, and you have the year-end rating. And as I was starting to dig into this a little bit more and conduct retrospectives and focus groups with internal team members to really understand what their perspective was around the performance management process, was it accomplishing anything more than giving compensation a rating that they could use to anchor their merit and bonus to, or were people really getting a lot of value out of it? And the answer is probably what you would expect, is people didn't look forward to it. They felt like it took up a lot of their time to complete the tasks throughout the year, and then they didn't get a lot out of it. And so as I was researching some other approaches, or maybe what the latest thinking was around performance, I came across several kind of influential thought leaders on this, but one that stood out to me was like Marcus Buckingham, and his experience, of course, with Gallup, and just thinking about strengths that people had and how to encourage folks to do better within their roles, eventually produced this notion of what he referred to as like the kind of standout program. And as you look at standout, he tried to explain that as we were trying to do with traditional performance management, we're attempting to both measure performance and then activate talent. And we're doing neither of those very well. And that was a light bulb moment for me, because I thought, how am I really contributing value to the organization beyond just giving ratings from my group over to compensation, when I could instead be figuring out ways to drive behaviors among leaders and team members that would ultimately unlock their own potential and make them more effective at what they do. And so that's what really kind of set me down this path of transitioning from traditional performance management to what we call performance enablement, which again is really geared towards unleashing individual potential. And how you do that It's through regular conversations on the topics that matter most, right? The things that matter most, and making sure you and your leader are aligned on what the go forward tasks are. So that's critical. And so what we ultimately want our team members to see these practices as being more of tools and habits that are going to help them succeed. Things that if they actually implement them and follow through on them, is going to improve their overall chances of success by the end of the year, instead of an HR mandate that they have to go in and do this within this particular time frame.
So it sounds like performance management really kind of can boil down to just performance measurement or giving someone a grade, whereas what you're looking at is how do I actually find out where someone is and then use that information to benefit the employee and our organization by putting them into the right place, giving them the right guidance, and giving them the right information and tools that they can use to grow in their career, and then provide increased value back into the organization as a result.
Yeah, I mean, you're ultimately in these regular conversations letting the employee know where they stand, and then get alignment on what they need to do going forward, and just creating that action as those actions around it. So it's pretty straightforward. There are 4 topics that we have consistently across each of what we call check-ins, and that's just around the results so far, their objectives and key results for the upcoming quarter, and their development progress, because we want to become a culture of continuous development as well. And then any needs that team member might have, the manager. So it creates an opening for team members to ask for things that they may not ultimately feel comfortable with, if they happen to need something from their manager.
That's really interesting. Creating that culture where you have this clear set of expectations about what the performance conversation or what the continuous conversation is going to be about. It does a lot of things for employees. Like, it gives clarity about what the conversation is going to be, which relieves anxiety. It gives managers a clear template for what to follow and where to have a conversation, so they're not making it up on the fly or having different conversations. And it creates this sense of psychological safety, because it's okay to talk about those things in that conversation. It's okay to share something with your manager, or it's okay to provide growth and feedback to your employee if it's positive, or if there's also a little bit of where they need to work on things as well. That, I think, is a really strong place of culture building where HR really gets to be in the leadership role. And when you're able to do that, you're actually able to create so much clarity and just like lightening the mental load for employees and for managers. So I think that's really great. I'm curious, because what you've talked about here is like, what are you doing to create consistent expectations and conversations for employees and managers? Flipping it back over to the HR team, when you're working on supporting the HR team based on these performance conversations, what kinds of key metrics are you focused on tracking, and what are they, and how are they tied back to the business? What are you seeing in terms of what are you looking for in terms of what's happening at the performance level, and how does that tie to employee trends and business outcomes?
Yeah, great question. So we've just started moving into these quarterly check-ins. So we're on our second quarterly check-in that we're just wrapping up now. And a couple of metrics that we're looking at is, of course, overall participation, meaning the team members going in there, providing some of the answers to those questions that I just mentioned. And then the managers going in and providing any supplementary, details that they might want to talk about as part of the conversation. The way that we leverage those answers is more of an outline or a form or agenda for the conversation between our manager and a team member. And we have a way of tracking that within our performance system of those conversations taking place. But we also wonder how the quality of the conversations have been. And so within our current quarterly vibe, so the continuous listening survey that we send out, we've incorporated a question around how valuable was that checking conversation. And so far, it's looking quite positive, with upwards of 90+% of people finding it or agreeing with the statement that it was valuable for them. But we wanted to make sure that not only having the check-in conversation, but they understand the value of it, and they're more willing to have it. And so that's a way of us like confirming that we're on the right track with the way that we've trained our leaders to have the conversations, the guidance that we're giving them, and then that the team members feel like they're leaving with something of note that they can use going forward. Now, we're going to layer onto that, of course, some correlations between, by their quarterly check-in participation and their overall performance at the end of the year. So it's more of a longitudinal thing. But we also want to look at how their favorability is overall in engagement. So the favorability, if we think about the question that we ask, which is like, now that we're doing this quarterly, how was your last 90 days? And they could rate on a scale. And so for those people who are selecting either good or pure goodness, and that's more of our rating, that they are considered having more favorable perspective of their last 90 days. And so we would anticipate the individuals who are having those check-in conversations, having a positive experience, are going to be more favorable overall. And so we can start to tease out a lot of these correlations and these relationships to show the importance of one thing on the other. So the importance of having a check-in conversation on overall favorability, the quality of the conversation on overall favorability. And then longer term, I think the hypothesis, of course, would be that those people who are having regular check-in conversations, having quality check-in conversations, are going to be on average performing better than those that are not.
Tell me a little bit more about the kinds of questions that leaders were asking that made you realize you needed better access to data or a better way to organize it. And I think, one of the things you're talking about is this, quarterly vibe check-in where you're not just trying to get to quantity of performance reviews or conversations completed, but getting into quality.
So I think it's a matter of making it as easy as possible for leaders to find the information they're looking for and alleviating the burden on our HR business partners. You can imagine as an HR business partner, before we had like a centralized home for our people analytics, they were constantly getting questions about like, what's my turnover rate, annualized turnover rate so far? And, it really takes the HR business partner away from being a strategic partner to one just being kind of administrative assistant pulling data. And our intention was to help streamline this by getting the fanciest tool that we could find. And it is actually really fantastic because of how it integrates all of the data sources that we have, and we have several, to allow people to go in and look at kind of pre-populated dashboards and then also modify those dashboards very easily to get some, insights in short notice. So a couple of things with that. As we use this platform and we're pulling in data sources from multiple places, now we have it all in one location where we can start looking at comparisons.
So what are all the data sets that get pulled into there? I'm just very curious. It sounds like you've got engagement data, you've got conversations. What else is in there?
Yeah, so we have the engagement data. We have the performance data that's coming across. We have a lot of the turnover data, promotion data. We have new hire data as well, in talent acquisition data coming from our. I always get this mixed up. I forget what they call the system that they use to track.
The ATS, applicant tracking system.
Tracking system. Thank you for that. But they utilize all this data together in one place, and then they can start making correlations and showing relationships between the different data sets. So let's say, for instance, we could look at the team members that are joining for a specific location or a specific background, and we can start to see how their performance is trending. Like maybe we start to see a particular profile pop up around people with this background, from this college education, in this region, tend to be performing hires. Or with engagement, of course, seeing the relationship between overall favorability or maybe even the answers to specific engagement questions and overall turnover. And so there's some attrition models that are already built in that pull in a lot of these data points and can indicate like the the biggest drivers in overall turnover. So that starts to get into kind of the more advanced components. But, if we try to reverse engineer this and ask a simple question, like, what is it our leaders need, or maybe what do they need that they don't know that they need? We got to think about what's driving the business. And so we have some scorecard metrics around people. Of course, it's very standard, and we want to keep the turnover low for our top talent. We want to keep turnover low for our warehouses because, we've got to make sure that we're ready for our busy season. And then likewise, we want to make sure that our leaders are action planning against the results of their engagement data each quarter. So, those are going to be core elements to what they see in their dashboards. And then you start to think like, okay, what's going to help supplement those? Because they're more lagging metrics. And so what are some of the leading indicators that we could try to incorporate in it? So we talk about, keeping the turnover rate low for our top talent. They want to show like, okay, what is the favorability level coming out of our engagement survey for top talent? Like we want to make sure that if it's trending downward, we may need to address that before that group actually leaves. And so again, it's just a key way of allowing our leaders to produce like some self-service solution where they can go in and see these trends and look at this data to make sure that they are aware of what might be coming down the road and make valuable people decisions.
And have you ever had a moment where the data revealed something surprising or counterintuitive, something you wouldn't have spotted if you didn't have the dashboards or you didn't have all that data centralized?
Yeah, I know I keep leaning on the engagement data quite a bit, but it's because it's so telling. And we had looked at action planning. Again, action planning is what our more senior level leaders do after they get their vibe or engagement results. And for those team members who recognize the actions were actually being taken, they had a 36 percentage point higher level of favorability than those that didn't recognize any action being taken. So I think that was just like a really big flag for us that we need to make sure that team members recognize the actions are being taken, and we need to be closing the feedback loop with them because it's clearly related to favorability as we would have anticipated. And so being able to see that kind of all in one place made it very easy.
That's interesting. And I think what I really love about this conversation is that for so long there's been a focus on performance management conversations or on goals and OKRs data to show you how individuals are performing, how the company is progressing in terms of meeting strategic goals. But there's been a little bit of a quietness around engagement data, which I think is something people are sleeping on, because you're right, you can have qualitative data that tells you numbers, but if you don't have that qualitative data that tells you how are people feeling, what is the impression of what's happening, you're missing a huge element or a huge part of the puzzle. It's almost like taking something from 2D and moving it into 3D to really understand what's happening.
Yeah, and it's very true. So if you think about an individual's perspective, that's how they feel. That's their reality. And so we've got to make sure that we understand how they're feeling instead of just, again, like you said, looking at the cold hard numbers because they don't tell the full story.
One of the things that's starting to come up really often when it comes to data and analytics is the role of AI in that process. So are you starting to explore AI in your data analytics, within your teams, within the tools that you use? And what potential or concerns do you see around AI when it comes to people analytics?
All great questions. Yes. AI is the burgeoning technology that I think has kind of unlimited potential. So a couple places that we started utilizing it. One is with our engagement survey platform. So when we ask our leaders to go in an action plan, now when they're within their dashboard and to look at the results, we have comment summaries. They don't have to read through all of the comments. Instead, it creates comment summary around five of the most important topics based upon the sentiment. So that really streamlines things, and they even have an AI assistant. So if you're trying to cut to the chase, for lack of a better expression, you can go in and just say, okay, what are 2 actions I could take to address the most pressing topic based upon the data? And it will provide you with actions. So that way it makes it a lot easier and you have to do a little less investigative work. Now, I would, of course, encourage our leaders to spend a little bit more time with the information that's being provided, but it's better than nothing. And I think that's the risk, of course, with AI is like, are we cheating in a way by like not spending more time with the information and just kind of assuming everything at face value? But we've got to see the silver lining here and just say, like, if we get them engaged with the data and we make it easier for them to use it, then that would ultimately be an improvement upon doing what we've done in the past, which is very limited. And so on the people analytics side, so our kind of more robust system that incorporates all of our data sources, they are introducing a new solution where it's tied into our kind of social networking tool of Teams. And you can just go into it and ask it a question. It's like, what was my turnover rate over the last quarter for my high-performing team members? And it would provide you an answer. And so that way you don't have a need to like go in and look at the dashboards. It'll shoot out an answer for you. And, that then kind of takes the place of what they were asking the HR business partner in the past. It saves them time from having to go in or maybe tailor a few of the dashboards if they're looking for it and building their own, and just getting them the information they need at their fingertips a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. I'm not in analytics specifically. I do more work in marketing and in content creation. And I often think about AI as being a really highly qualified graduate intern or first or second year employee in some respects, where it can deliver really solid information really quickly. And at some level, you can start by taking it at face value and accepting it. But before you hit send and roll out something really big, it's always good to double check or take a look. So oftentimes you can get really quick responses to a simple question, like, what is my attrition rate over the last 2 quarters? But then when you're starting to ask, what are some of the root causes or what are some actions I can take? That's when you still need a human to come in and take a look and be like, ooh, does this recommendation work for desk workers versus non-desk workers? Or does this recommendation work for my night shift team versus my day shift team? And so starting to understand where those recommendations come into the practice of your own organization is where that human level of assessment is very helpful still.
Yeah, and I will say that it always has to pass the gut check. And you need somebody with a certain level of experience with the business to be able to provide that gut check. So again, I'd say earlier, let's not take everything at face value. You've got to really dig in. So, and if you get a response back from AI that really kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit, then you're going to have to spend a little bit more time in the data to really uncover where that's coming from, if that makes sense. And then, there's qualitative information you get from talking to your team members. So maybe you did uncover something that you weren't anticipating, and you can validate that by talking to your team members or looking more closely at the data. But yeah, there's a lot to be said by just taking the time to validate what's being provided to you.
Mm-hmm. And with the growth of AI within the workforce, there's a lot of conversation around AI replacing jobs or taking over and replacing whole roles. Do you ever think AI will completely replace a data analytics team?
No, precisely for the reason that I was mentioning earlier. And you gotta have a human to be able to double check the responses that AI is producing. And you need somebody, again, with enough experience and familiarity with the business to be able to say, yes, that's accurate, or no, that doesn't make sense. We got to figure out why it's saying that, and just check the AI. Now, could it shrink the team? Absolutely. I think that's possible. I've started seeing examples of AI agents being built into like the org hierarchy. So doing a lot more of the, I think the term that's being used now, and I've really only heard this in the last few weeks, so it must be relatively recent, but the agentic AI, so agents being added in to the work that's being done that's more routine. So to train it up to do a lot of that kind of more manual, repeatable tasks that I think people will be happy to take off of their plate and then allow them to do more of the strategic work. So that's the intention. So I think ultimately it will be better because it'll save us a lot more time and effort and heartache when it comes to a lot of those high demand, I think, low productivity tasks that we have to spend our time on, only to just make sure that the information they're giving is accurate, and then kind of move on, start thinking about big picture, like how can we have more of an impact overall on the organization within our function.
Mm-hmm. And so I think this is a very natural follow-up question. What skills do you think will be most important to your people workers, your humans in your analytics teams as AI becomes more embedded in their everyday tools, or even as agents within their org chart?
So I think they need to know how to best interact with the agents and be very proficient in prompts and understanding how to prompt them, how to make that agent more effective at what it does. So continue to train them and then test it out, of course. But with the people analytics role, so as a human within the people analytics side of the business, we've got to make sure that we're just kind of on top of what are those data sources that we want to be pulling on. Where are some opportunities for us to identify relationships that we haven't identified before, and the AI can help us out with that. So we still have a level of creativity that I think AI does not have, or probably will never have, because all it is just really scraping the history and the knowledge of employee experience and knowledge. So we have that level of creativity to start thinking about, like, okay, what are these relationships between people in the work and in the overall impact on the business that we can continue to guide both the AI on and the business side to make sure that we are providing the best insights going forward.
Over the last few months, I've been thinking a lot about a parallel between the invention of the computer and the AI coming into the workforce. And I really have been thinking a lot about the movie Hidden Figures, where you had people who were the computers who would do all of the mathematical equations to help get us into space. And then at some point, they brought in a computer. Someone had to learn a whole new set of skills on how do you actually work with a computer? How do you actually make it do the thing you want to do, especially when we were talking about supercomputers. But at the end of the day, they still needed to understand the foundations of what the math equations were, how those things worked, so that they could gut check what the responses were that were coming out. And even today, like, we use calculators. I grew up on the TI-89 calculator, going to all of my math classes with that. And I know that I use that for doing all of my mathematical equations, but I can still gut check, that doesn't sound like it's right, or something looks like it's missing, and I still know the underlying theory behind it. But you're right, we have to start developing new skills. How do we interact with these new tools? How do we direct these new tools? And then how do we use these new tools to allow us to get more creative or to get to the next stage where we're trying to problem solve what we couldn't before? Cool. Last question for you today. For someone who's stepping into a people analytics leadership role for the first time, especially without a technical background, what advice would you give them?
So if you think about, like, people analytics, it can sound like a very, nerdy profession, kind of like a developer, where you're going in, you're developing code in order to kind of build something. But at the same time, too, you're building something that ultimately people are going to use, and it's going to make their life hopefully easier and faster. With people analytics, you're building insights for your leadership team to make better decisions overall. And ideally, that's going to drive business results. It's going to make sure that the right people get into the right roles at the right time, and that we're much more efficient at the things that we do. And you're kind of at the precipice of that. So instead of kind of wandering in the forest, now you have you're creating a path for people to follow and giving them the guiding posts to make sure they're heading in the right direction or taking the routes they need to take.
Mm-hmm. Something that I learned early on in my career, not working necessarily with data analytics, but I use it now when I work with my data analytics team all the time. When I was working with the product team, I had to learn how to not ask for what I thought was the answer. So not, I need a bridge to cross this river, but to say, I need to get across this river with 5 trucks that are really big. Figure out what the right approach is. Is it a ferry? Is it a bridge? And let the engineers actually look, or in this case, the people analytics teams, look at the resources that are available, the data that they have, to back into what is the best way to get to the answer that you're looking for or the insight that you're looking for. And that has a lot to do with just getting better about asking for what you actually are looking for, as opposed to the thing you think the expected outcome is. So instead of saying, I need to know what the attrition rate is by XYZ metric, you're actually asking for, I need to understand like what's causing different groups of people to leave at the highest rates. And then you might actually find something new and different. So learning how to ask those questions was something that I've learned from working with product teams that I find has made the insights I get back from my data analytics teams so much more valuable.
Yeah, in the way that we're thinking about it here, and I appreciate you bringing that up, is from a lean perspective, because we're trying to introduce lean concepts within KE, is like going back and asking the question, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And so that helps people kind of understand, okay, to your example, like we need to cross the river and we have to do it with this many things. So, and we're limited in this respect. So I think kind of painting the picture of what the situation is and being very clear on the root cause of the problem that we're trying to address allows us to attack it more effectively.
I think that's exactly it. So that's really interesting. Thank you, Nick. This was a really great conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate having me again.
As we wrap up today's conversation with Nick, let's think about a few ideas you can take with you today. First, shifting your mindset from performance management to performance enablement can change the way employees experience feedback. By creating consistent, structured check-ins, you're not just tracking performance, you're giving people the clarity and support they need to grow. Second, centralizing your people analytics can make it easier for leaders to connect the dots between engagement, retention, and performance. Nick showed how putting that data in one place empowers leaders to make timely and informed decisions that directly influence culture and outcomes. Third, while AI is making analytics faster and more accessible, human judgment still matters. The best insights come when technology and experience work together to validate findings and to shape action. This ensures that data leads to meaningful, people-centered results. And finally, Nick's commitment to creating and acting on feedback loops is a reminder that when HR brings together listening, enablement, and analytics, it doesn't just create a better employee experience. It also equips leaders to build stronger, more resilient organizations. Be sure to stay tuned for our next episode of the People Fundamentals podcast. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube Music. And if you like what you hear, share us with your friends and colleagues. We'll see you again soon.